A reading from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 8, verses 26 through 39 from the Message. They sailed on to the country of the Gerasenes, directly opposite Galilee. As he stepped out onto land, a madman from town met him. He was a victim of demons. He hadn't worn clothes for a long time, nor lived at home. He lived in the cemetery. When he saw Jesus, he screamed, fell before him, and howled, "What business do you have messing with me? You're Jesus, Son of the high God, but don't give me a hard time." The man said this because Jesus had started to order the unclean spirit out of him. Time after time, the demon threw the man into convulsions. He had been placed under constant guard and tied with chains and with shackles, but crazed and driven wild by the demon. He would shatter the bonds. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" My name is Mob, he said, because many demons afflicted me. And they begged Jesus desperately not to order them to the bottomless pit. A large herd of pigs was grazing and rooting on a nearby hill, and the demons begged Jesus to order them into the pigs. He gave the order. It was even worse for the pigs than for the man. Crazed, they stampeded over a cliff into the lake and drowned. Now those tending the pigs, scared to death, bolted and told their story in town and country. People went out to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had been sent, sitting there at Jesus' feet, wearing decent clothes and making sense. It was a holy moment, and for a short time, they were more reverent than curious. Then those who had seen it happen told how the demonic had been saved. And later, a great many people from the Gerasene countryside got together and asked Jesus to leave. Too much change, too fast, and they were scared. So Jesus got back into the boat and set off. The man whom he had delivered from the demons asked to go with him, but he sent him back, saying, "Go home and tell everything God did in you." So he went back and he preached all over the town everything Jesus had done in him. Thus ends the reading of our gospel. Excuse me, I brought my frog along today. While on the outskirts of a city, this man, chained, shackled, under guard, and forced to live in the tombs, not allowed into the city, approaches Jesus, who just got off the boat and is walking toward the town. Seeing Jesus, the man falls in front of Jesus and shouts, speaking to Jesus, "Jesus, why are you here? What do you want with me? Don't torment me." And then this man, filled with the demons, acknowledges Jesus is the Son of Man, the Son of the Most High God. This man, filled with legions, unclean spirits, recognized who Jesus was and from where Jesus came, from God. Now, Jesus had already, commanded the unclean spirits to come out of the man. The herdsmen ran into town telling what they had just witnessed. People rushed to see for themselves, finding the man in his right mind, clothed and sitting at Jesus' feet. The people fearing the man while he was consumed by the demons, by the legions, now fears this healed, transformed man. What are some of the things we fear today? What are things others we know fear also? How do our fears take shape in the world we live in today? Our society enslaved other races to serve and make white Anglo-Saxon men successful, while keeping the other races and cultures from learning and growing, from being successful in their lives and in their families and in their skin and beings, and made to live in servitude without freedoms. Native American children, some as young as 5 years old, were abducted from their families by our government, by police back in the 1860s, and almost for 100 years. They were abducted and taken to boarding schools, sometimes several hundred miles away. Children ripped away from their families, forcibly taken from their tribes to areas they didn't know. They were there to unlearn their culture, their languages, religious practices, dress, and learn to speak like and worship whatever Christian religion was involved in this relocation. Ultimately, many children were killed or died. You've heard on the news the last 3 to 5 years, the unearthing of huge mass burials found at some of the boarding schools here in America and in Canada. Much of this and much more can be learned by studying the doctrine of discovery and American law, which is still on the books, but not practiced right now. These things and more have been done and continue to be done in the name of Christianity in our world today. Here in America, our society continues to marginalize people of color, of differing beliefs. Certain groups believe there's only one way you can believe. We marginalize the LGBTQ and transgender community through its banning of things like even saying the word gay in Florida, and its hateful acts toward them. White supremacists, who are like neo-Nazis, want no one in their society, in their community, city, town, country, who aren't white like them and don't believe and live exactly the way they dictate. You'll also hear them being called, or calling themselves, I should say, patriots today. You'll even hear it on some of the political announcements for them. Many so-called evangelical Christian churches, denominations, expect all to believe exactly as they do and respond to things in our society their way, one way, critical and hateful. And so they marginalize others in the name of Christianity, the Bible, and Christ, to control them. Our society marginalizes by making critical judgments on those with physical disabilities, mental health issues, and/or disabilities, controlling women's lives, keeping them quiet and less than. The LGBTQ plus community currently is facing one of the most hate-based attacks, and people are dying. Today and tomorrow, we celebrate Juneteenth Day. Wisconsin's one of the leading states and communities that had Juneteenth celebrations for years. My hunch is many of you know what Juneteenth celebrates. It commemorates the events of June 19th, 1865, when Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas, to inform enslaved African Americans the Civil War had ended and they were now free. General Granger's announcements put into effect the Emancipation Proclamation, which had been issued more than 2.5 years earlier on January 1, 1863, by President Abraham Lincoln. And it finally reached these slaves in Galveston, Texas. When our founders came to America in search for, and among other things, religious freedom to worship in the way they chose, our country wasn't free for others. Churches throughout the years following claimed sovereignty over those non-white Anglo-Saxon peoples found here, and a little later brought here against their will. You know, the abducted American Indians and Africans. Some of you may be asking, well, Pastor, why are you going on about this? Today's gospel is talking about the marginalized in our society and how society in general lives out their fears of others being different from themselves by shutting them out, marginalizing them, naming them as less than, wrong, or disvalued. Let's look at the gospel for a moment. Jesus cast out the legions. The man is healed, dressed, and sitting at Jesus' feet when the townsfolk come running to see for themselves. And what does the gospel tell us? They were afraid. Here, the man is totally changed, transformed, healed, and sitting at Jesus' feet, waiting and listening and grateful. He wants to follow Jesus, but Jesus says, no, you go back to your hometown. You know, before you were imprisoned by chains, shackles, homelessness, and clotheslessness. Back to your family and tell how God and what God has done for you. Theologian Joy Moore says, hearing these stories in a new light, stories of people of faith, stories which make us understand what it means to be fully human, image bearers of God, and those who bear witness to God showing up in the worst of place and transforming them into the most beautiful place of hope. A colleague of hers, theologian Matt Skinner, put it this way: this is a disturbing passage in Scripture because it speaks truth about human society. No one, he says, wants transformation in this story except this man Legion, which is what he took on as a name, and Jesus. All the others either resent it or are utterly terrified and fearful of it. You see, the people had a pretty good deal going on. By forbidding the man to come to town, by chaining him and shackling him in the graveyard, he was kept hostage. It was their means of keeping themselves safe, and maybe even keeping him safe. Now, the man isn't chained up. He's not chain-upable anymore, and he can't be locked up since Jesus cast those demons out. And this, I believe, speaks in ways society tries to control the things which scare us. You know the old saying, out of sight, out of mind. But here today in this gospel, this man is healed from massive torments of legions, yet he is tormented still by the people's reaction, by society's not knowing what to do with him now that he's healed, and they still fear him. Scripture says and they were afraid. But what's the reason for fear? What's the reason for fear then and now? Where does it come from? And why do they fear now after knowing what the man was like before? They can clearly see the difference now. Yet seeing him, they can clearly see the transformation, the miraculous change in the man. Can't they? First, they did what they thought was best for the man and for them to protect him and themselves. What about we the people in the land of the free? Do we fear only what we don't know and don't understand? If so, what is our society doing to understand our fears? Are we taking a step back or maybe a step forward to get to know and understand those different from us who we fear? Or does our fear get stuck and turn into hate? For some in our society, it's clear. Fear not only gets stuck in hate, hate rears its ugly head and will do anything in the name of hate. Today, this scripture calls each of us to take a look at ourselves and at the communities we live in, work in, along with the broader society and our country, and judge our own and community's very practices. You see, these practices aren't just past human practices, which because of the resurrection, we don't do anymore. No, they're still open and active and hurting others. Reality is we still do them as a society. And these last few years, some have begun to recognize their own behaviors and their community's behaviors. That's kind of what happened when the Black Lives Matter marches and rallies began, where more and more of our citizens were taking part in them, especially white Anglo-Saxon folks, where folks began to recognize it wasn't about wanting to keep ourselves safe and them safe. It was to keep others in their place and out of our own desire to take care of them, which really was trying to control others because we wanted to be safe. That sounds a little confusing. But people are frightened by what they can't control. They don't have the power if they don't hold tight boundaries around others because they are fearful of what they don't know or understand. Today, when the community comes running to see what's happened, they are fearful. Whether it's demon possession or miraculous transformation, each are frightening because we don't understand. Though I'm preaching this sermon to this congregation, which has and is still growing and moving forward in its love for all, I know for myself at times some bits and pieces of my past creep up, often in subtle ways, subtle words, sometimes just saying a word that puts it back into that era, rearing its old head. So this morning, Jesus invites each of us all to ponder. Maybe I'm not the one who's being freed. Just maybe I'm the one who was the cause of someone's being chained, bound, and outcast in our society. And once we reach deep down within us for the answer within, we too will experience transformation because both ways bring transformation. Both ways bring transformation. Recognizing who and what we or our communities have done, and being open to change. Realizing that maybe we were a part of that too. Those are transforming moments